Special election out in Ohio last night, the last special election before the November midterms, and it strongly suggests that blue wave Republicans fear it may well be building. Now, the race officially remains too close to call. Republican Troy Balderson, he is clinging to a lead right there, you see, of 1,564 votes over Danny O'Connor, the Democrat. Of course, the backdrop, a district here that President Trump won by 11 points in 2016. There are still ballots being counted. Also, a piece of news we can tell you about just a couple of hours ago. Franklin County, the largest part of this district, officials there said that a counting error will drop Balderson's lead by 190 votes. When we're talking about something this small, that is potentially significant there. That certainly increases the possibility of a recount in this district. Now, despite potentially averting a disaster there in Ohio for his party, President Trump today tried to take a victory lap, writing on Twitter, "As long as I campaign and or support Senate and House candidates within reason, they will win. If I find the time, which I must, we will have a giant red wave." Trump also claimed his 11th hour appearance over the weekend in the district was the golden ticket in the race, writing, "When I decided to go to Ohio for Troy Balderson, he was down in early voting, 64 to 36. That was not good. After my speech on Saturday night, there was a big turn for the better." Now, not everybody agrees with that assessment. Republican pollster Frank Luntz noting, "I'm sure Republicans will celebrate tonight, but a one-point victory in that district is nothing to commend. The GOP have to do something really significant in September if they want to keep the House in November." For more, I'm joined by Michelle Goldberg, columnist for the New York Times, Noel Nikpour, Republican strategist, and Philip Rucker, White House bureau chief for the Washington Post. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Noel, let me just ask you, the Trump factor.
Right.
He came to the district, and there's a revolt afoot against Donald Trump in the suburbs of that district, and I think a lot of the suburbs of this country. There's also a lot of affection for him in the rural areas, and there's some talk that maybe he did help Republicans there.
Right.
But that's a conundrum for Republican candidates this fall, isn't it?
Right. You know what? And something you brought up to my point is the fact that when President Trump came in, who's to say that it didn't push the opponent's numbers up because of people that don't like Donald Trump, so they feel more energized to get out and vote against
the backlash.
Right.
Sure.
So it's kind
so
of
what do you do if you're a Republican candidate, you're in one of these competitive races, the president's saying, "Hey, I want to come to your district this fall." What do you tell him?
It's the same catch-22 as when Obama was trying to do some campaigning with people that were running on the Democratic ticket that were like, I don't want him to come campaign for me. The same thing when Bush was getting out of office and we had a lot of surrogates running and people were like, would you like, George W. Bush to come? They're like, no, we do not. So I think it depends on where you are. What's really interesting about Ohio is the fact that it is usually red, red, red. And the fact that we have not moved the needle with big numbers, that's scary. And although, I know President Trump and Republican Party, everybody's taking a victory lap, I don't think that I agree with Frank Luntz on this. You don't need to take a full-out pop the champagne, huge celebration on this, because we need to look at these numbers. We need to look at the candidate and see if there was a fail within the candidate specifically, or we need to look at what's behind this and see, are we in trouble? And I think that Ronna Romney McDaniels, when she came out and said, this is a victory and this is great, we're celebration, I think that's great. And I love her. I think she's great. But I think that one of the things, this was a great opportunity to use her platform and say, listen, Republicans, we can't have things this close. Although we're going to celebrate a victory, maybe, we need to make sure we get out this vote.
But speaking of getting out the vote, the thing that jumped out at me, Michelle, looking at these results last night, it was the suburbs. It was it was in Columbus, and immediately outside of it, O'Connor won 65% of the vote and had astronomical turnout. If you just looked at that part of the district, you said it's over, the Democrat wins. There was a lot of rural support for the Republican, but that told me the enthusiasm is on the Democratic side here.
Right, and I've seen it all over the country. Every single place I've been in this country over the last year and a half, you meet these women who had always voted before but had never canvassed. I've met women who've cut back at work to devote themselves to anti-Trump activism. I mean, people who wake up in the morning and think, what can I do to flip this district? Whose husbands kind of barely recognize them. And you can see it in the numbers, right? You can see the complete collapse of college-educated white women in the Republican Party. They're also underwater now with college-educated white men, although less so. And, I think there are people all over this country who would crawl over broken glass to vote against.
But is that the message for the Democrat Party, just anti-Trump?
I don't think it it has to be the message, and I don't think that. I think most of these candidates don't even have to talk about Trump that much because it's implicit. The candidates are out there talking about health care or talking about higher minimum wages, talking about economic issues, and they barely need to mention Trump because there's all of these activists out there for whom it's implicit.
Well, and speaking of mentioning Trump, that name did happen to come up last night at the Republican. They said it's a victory celebration. They're claiming victory. Troy Balderson had plenty of gratitude to go around. Let's listen to what he said.
I'd like to thank President Trump. And I'd also like to take the time to thank Vice President Pence. There's many others. I could just keep going on and on. Over the next 3 months, I'm going to do everything I can to keep America great again.
Notably there, though, Balderson did not thank the governor of Ohio, the former congressman from that district, John Kasich, who came through with a key endorsement of Balderson late in that campaign. But, of course, Kasich criticized the decision of Trump to come in there and campaign at the end. And Philip, let me bring you in on that. The president trying to take credit for this. The role he's going to be playing when we get into September, October, very early November, how active is he going to be going into these districts?
Steve, he wants to be very active. White House advisors that I've talked to in recent weeks say the president's hungry to get out there. He wants to play in all these races. There's a clear effort by his advisors as well as by the congressional leaders to keep him focused on places where he adds value on the trail. Go to some of those red states with Senate races like Montana, like North Dakota, like West Virginia. Get him to West Virginia all the time. But they don't really want him campaigning in some of these suburban districts. The president, on the other hand, thinks that he's added value anywhere he goes. He wants to be out there. He wants these Republican candidates to run under his banner. He wants the midterms to be about him. And I think he's going to be active both on the trail, but also, expressing his thoughts on Twitter about these campaigns as they heat up.
And Philip, in terms of Republicans, the Republicans there in D.C. trying to save the House, have they come up with any kind of a strategy for how they're going to integrate Trump into their effort, how they're going to sort of just deal with the volatility of what's he going to tweet this morning?
Well, they can't control what he's going to tweet. I think they wish they could, and they definitely can't. Look, they're going to try to find some places where he can go. They're actually using Vice President Pence a lot on the House races. He for months now, has been doing a lot of campaigning in some of these House districts, as well as raising money for some of the House candidates and some of the other groups. But look, the president is going to go where he wants to go. He wants to be campaigning, and I think the White House is trying to keep him focused on the Senate.
Michelle, I mean, there's the school of thought, and I tend to subscribe to it, that when you're the opposition party in the midterm, you almost don't need a message. The message is just, hey, if you have any issue with the president, use us as a check, use us as a vehicle. I'm looking at that pattern, and we get some numbers we'll show later, though, with such concentrated Democratic strength right there around Columbus. Is there a longer-term issue for Democrats here, that support just being too concentrated around, cities in immediate metro areas?
Well, I think that it's, because it's not just metro areas, right? It's also metro suburbs. So if you start winning, say, the suburbs of like Houston and some of these other big cities, that's a governing majority, right? You can kind of live without the hardest core rural areas. I think that eventually there might be some tension in that you have, because the opposition to Trump is so broad and is kind of a big tent. You have candidates in Orange County who are sort of fiscally conservative, socially moderate. Then you have some of these economic populists in Michigan, for example. That might cause tension later on, but I think that those are luxury problems to have, a party that's too big, and that stuff can be resolved in time after the midterms.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.